The mail-order bride showed up crying, and the giant cowboy said, "You don't have to pretend with me." She thought she was stepping into a new life, but instead, she walked straight into danger. Her groom was already dead, his bitter brother waiting to claim her like property. And in a town ruled by whispers, the only man who stood by her side was the quiet giant with calloused hands and a hidden past. But as the church bell tolled and the dust rose from thundering hooves, the truth struck harder than a gunshot. This weeping bride wasn't powerless at all. A secret inheritance put her at the center of a storm, railroad greed, forged debts, and a fire meant to destroy her future. Now, with the jail keys clanging and the whole town watching, she must decide. Will she run from the lies stacked against her, or fight for a home, a family, and a love she never expected? When the flames die down, whose truth will survive, and whose heart will break? Before we begin, drop a hello in the comments. Share your corner of the world and how you're feeling today. It's a beautiful thing to witness how stories can connect us across oceans, languages, and lives. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as the stagecoach rattled into San Miguel Junction, Colorado. Dust clouds billowed around the wheels, coating everything in a fine golden haze. The coach lurched to a stop in front of the general store, and among the disembarking passengers was Christine Whitford, a dark blue traveling dress wrinkled from the long journey. Her hands trembled as she gripped her carpet bag. Red-rimmed eyes peered out from beneath her neat bonnet as she scanned the gathering crowd, searching for a face she knew she wouldn't find. The letter announcing Ephraim Thatcher's death had reached her too late to halt her journey west. The townsfolk gathered, whispering among themselves. Christine could feel their stares burning into her as she took an unsteady step forward. Her boot caught on the metal step, and she pitched forward with a small cry. Strong hands caught her before she could fall. Christine looked up into the weathered face of a tall cowboy, his broad shoulders blocking out the harsh sunlight. His eyes were kind beneath the brim of his dust-covered hat. "Easy there, miss," he said, his voice gentle and deep. "Let me help you down proper." "Thank you," Christine whispered, steadying herself against his solid presence. Tears threatened to spill over, and she blinked hard to hold them back. The cowboy studied her face for a moment. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said softly, seeing right through her brave facade. Something in his quiet understanding broke through her careful composure. "He's dead," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "Ephraim Thatcher, my intended, died of fever last week. His brother Miles sent word, but it was too late to stop my journey." "I'm Levi Boone," the cowboy introduced himself, keeping a steadying hand at her elbow. "Let's get you somewhere quiet to rest." Before they could move, a sharp voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "Now wait just a minute." A well-dressed man with a pinched face pushed forward. "This here's a matter of business, Boone. The lady's passage was paid for by my brother." "Miles Thatcher, I reckon." Levi's voice had turned cool. "A woman ain't property, paid for or not." "The law might see things different." Miles sneered. "There's debts to be settled." "The only settling needed right now is getting Miss Whitford to the boarding house," Levi replied firmly. He turned to Christine. "Ma'am, if you'll allow me." Christine nodded gratefully, clutching her bag closer. The crowd parted as Levi guided her toward the boarding house, its white-painted porch a welcome sight after the dusty street. Miles's angry muttering followed them, but Levi's tall presence kept him at bay. The boarding-house parlor was cool and dim, smelling of beeswax and fresh-baked bread. The landlady, a plump woman with grey-streaked hair, clucked sympathetically and brought tea without being asked. Sheriff Abner Cole arrived shortly after, his badge glinting in the afternoon light. He was a weathered man with tired eyes and a careful way of speaking. "Miss Whitford," he said, removing his hat. "This is quite a situation we've got." "What can be done, Sheriff?" Christine asked, her hands wrapped around the warm teacup. "Circuit judge arrives tomorrow at first light," the sheriff explained. "Best to wait for his ruling on any claims Mr. Thatcher might make. Until then—" He glanced at Levi, who stood like a sentinel near the parlor door. "I'll keep watch," Levi stated simply. "The townsfolk can gawp all they like, but they'll do it from a distance." Christine felt tears welling up again at his kindness. "I haven't the money to return east," she admitted. "The stage fare—" "One thing at a time, miss," Levi said gently. "First light's soon enough for decisions." As the afternoon faded into evening, Christine sat in the parlor's fading light. The boarding-house clock ticked steadily, marking time as townsfolk passed by the windows, their curious faces appearing and disappearing like shadows. True to his word, Levi settled into a sturdy chair near the pot-bellied stove, his presence both reassuring and respectful. When the parlor grew dim, Christine found herself whispering prayers in the gathering darkness. "Lord, show me the way home," she murmured, "whatever that means now." Her fingers worried at the worn edges of her Bible, seeking comfort in its familiar feel. The boarding-house clock solemnly struck 9, each chime echoing in the quiet room. Levi rose silently and retrieved his trailcoat from the hook by the door. With gentle care, he draped the warm garment over Christine's shoulders. "We'll go to the courthouse together at sunrise," he said simply. "Get some rest, Miss Whitford. Tomorrow's soon enough to face what comes." The coat smelled of leather and prairie sage, and somehow its weight felt like protection. Christine drew it closer around her shoulders, grateful for this unexpected kindness from a stranger. In all her dreams of coming west as a bride, she had never imagined this, alone but for the mercy of a gentle giant who understood that sometimes the bravest thing was simply to sit quiet with someone's grief. Dawn crept over San Miguel Junction, painting the clapboard courthouse in soft rose and gold. The morning air still held its chill as townsfolk gathered, their boots scuffing against the wooden sidewalks. Christine Whitford stood straight-backed before the courthouse steps, her borrowed shawl pulled tight against the morning breeze. Levi Boone's solid presence behind her felt like an anchor in uncertain waters. The circuit judge, a silver-haired man with wire-rimmed spectacles, settled behind the scarred oak desk in the courthouse's main room. Sunlight streamed through dusty windows as he carefully unrolled a stack of official papers, spreading them across the desktop with methodical precision. "These documents," the judge announced, adjusting his spectacles, "are quite clear. The proxy marriage between Ephraim Thatcher and Miss Christine Whitford was properly witnessed and sealed in Pennsylvania. All legal requirements were met." He looked up, his gaze steady. "Mrs. Thatcher, as the deceased's lawful widow, you inherit half interest in both the mercantile property and its accounts." Miles Thatcher's face flushed red. "Now see here, Your Honor," he burst out, taking a step forward. "There are debts to consider, substantial debts. The store's finances dash." The judge's hand came down firmly on the desktop. "Mr. Thatcher, I warn you against any attempt at coercion. If there are legitimate debts, they will be properly documented and reviewed." His stern gaze fixed on Miles. "Any attempt to intimidate or defraud the widow will be dealt with severely." Miles subsided, but his eyes held a calculating gleam that made Christine's spine stiffen. Before anyone could speak further, the courthouse door swung open with a creak. A well-dressed man entered, his suit dusty from travel but still managing to look elegant. "Pardon the interruption," he said smoothly, removing his hat. "Mr. Lyle, representing the railroad. I've just received this telegram regarding the matter at hand." He produced a yellow paper with a flourish. Sheriff Cole stepped forward, taking the telegram and passing it to the judge. The judge's eyebrows rose slightly as he read. Mr. Lyle turned to Christine, his smile practiced and bland. "Mrs. Thatcher, the railroad has a standing interest in that mercantile lot. Prime location, you understand. We're prepared to make an immediate offer, save you the trouble of managing such a complicated inheritance." "The offer seems rather low," the judge commented dryly, looking up from the telegram. "Market conditions, Your Honor." Mr. Lyle's smile didn't waver. "Though I should mention that if we can't reach an agreement, the railroad might need to pursue condemnation proceedings. For the public good, you understand." Behind Christine, Levi shifted his weight. She could feel the tension radiating from him, though he remained silent, his hat held respectfully in his large hands. His presence gave her strength. "I'll need time to consider any offers," Christine said, proud that her voice remained steady despite her trembling hands. "And I'd like to see the store myself." Sheriff Cole cleared his throat. "Ma'am, might be best to let things settle a bit first. Town talk being what it is." "I appreciate your concern, Sheriff," Christine replied, "but I'll pray on it and see what the Lord reveals. I need to understand what I'm dealing with." Miles made a scoffing sound, but the judge's sharp look silenced him. Levi spoke for the first time, his deep voice quiet but carrying clearly. "Mrs. Thatcher could rest up at my ranch while things settle. It's peaceful out there. Gossip rides slower than a lame mule." His eyes met the sheriff's. "I give you my word she'll be safe and properly chaperoned. My housekeeper, Mrs. Garcia, lives on the property." Sheriff Cole studied Levi for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That might be wise, if Mrs. Thatcher agrees, so long as she returns when we need signatures on any formal papers." "I would be grateful," Christine said softly, looking up at Levi. The thought of escaping the town's curious stares and Miles's calculating presence filled her with relief. The judge gathered his papers. "Very well. Mrs. Thatcher, we'll send word when your presence is required. Mr. Thatcher?" He fixed Miles with a stern look. "I expect all store records to remain undisturbed until this matter is settled." Miles gave a tight nod, but his eyes followed Christine as she left the courthouse. Mr. Lyle tipped his hat, that bland smile still in place. "I'll leave the offer open for now, Mrs. Thatcher. Do consider it carefully." The morning sun had climbed higher as Christine waited near the livery stable. Levi emerged leading a handsome sorrel horse, its coat gleaming like polished copper. With efficient movements, he adjusted a spare side saddle to fit the horse properly. "Old Jake here is steady as they come," he assured her, patting the horse's neck. "He'll take good care of you." Christine touched the horse's velvet nose, drawing comfort from its gentle warmth. Levi's strong hands lifted her carefully onto the side saddle, making sure she was secure before mounting his own horse. As they rode out of town, the morning sun climbed toward noon in a high, hard sky. The distance grew between them and San Miguel Junction, marked by a trailing line of dust. Christine felt some of her tension ease with each hoofbeat, carrying her away from Miles's angry eyes and Mr. Lyle's calculating smile. The open range stretched before them, and for the first time since stepping off the stage, Christine felt she could breathe freely. Yet she knew this was just the beginning. The proxy marriage that should have been her fresh start had instead placed her squarely in the path of men who saw her inheritance as something to be claimed. She straightened her shoulders, grateful for Levi's quiet strength beside her as they rode toward whatever lay ahead. The afternoon sun beat down on the wagon road as Christine and Levi rode westward from San Miguel Junction. Christine's side saddle perch on Old Jake felt precarious. though the horse moved with a gentle steadiness that helped calm her nerves. Levi kept his mount a few lengths ahead, close enough to guide, but far enough to maintain proper distance. "See that red rock formation yonder?" Levi pointed to their left, where massive sandstone walls rose against the sky. "That's Thunder Canyon. Local folks say it echoes something fierce during storms." Christine shaded her eyes with one hand. "It's beautiful, in a wild sort of way." "Most everything out here is wild and beautiful both," Levi agreed. He gestured ahead where cottonwoods marked a dip in the landscape. "There's Settler's Spring just ahead. Good place to rest the horses and ourselves a spell." The spring bubbled up from between rocks, forming a clear pool before trickling away down a shallow draw. Tall cottonwoods offered welcome shade, their leaves rustling in the warm breeze. Levi helped Christine dismount, his big hands careful and respectful at her waist. "Travelers water their stock here," he explained, leading the horses to drink. "Been a stopping place since before my time." Christine sank gratefully onto a smooth boulder, stretching her aching legs. Levi pulled a cloth-wrapped bundle from his saddlebag and offered her a biscuit and some dried apple slices. "Much obliged," she said softly, accepting the simple meal. They ate in companionable silence for a few moments before Christine gathered her courage to speak. "Mr. Boone, I need to thank you for all this kindness to a stranger. No thanks needed, Mom. And please, call me Levi." She nodded, twisting a piece of dried apple between her fingers. "I admit, I'm afraid. Not of you," she added quickly, "but of being treated like property to be bartered. First as a mail-order bride, now as an heir to land the railroad wants." Levi's weathered face grew serious. "Been watching men use the law to break the weak for too long now. Railroad men, cattle barons, bankers. They write their own rules and call it progress." He sighed, a deep sound of weariness. "Gets tiresome, seeing good folks ground down under their wheels." "Is that why you offered to help me?" "Reckon so." He tossed a few apple pieces to his horse. That and no decent man could stand by while Miles Thatcher tried claiming a widow like she was part of the store inventory. They mounted up again after the rest, moving slower now as Christine's unused muscles protested the riding. The afternoon light was growing golden when Levi pointed ahead to a clearing. "Boone Ranch," he said simply. "Not much, but it's home." A two-room cabin of squared logs stood in the clearing, its cedar-shake roof weathered silver. A stout barn rose behind it, and to one side lay a kitchen garden where young corn plants pushed up through dark soil. A chicken coop and small corral completed the homestead. Levi helped Christine down, then led the horses to the barn. She stood uncertainly until he returned and guided her to the cabin's front door. "This here's the main room," he said, ushering her inside. A iron cook stove stood against one wall, with a plank table, 2 chairs, and a rope-woven rug marking the living space. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt occupied one corner. "You'll take the bed, of course. I've got a cot out on the porch where I sleep most nights, anyway." "I couldn't put you out of your own bed," Christine protested. "Wouldn't be proper otherwise," Levi said firmly. He moved to the stove and began laying a fire. "I'll heat some water so you can wash up, then cook us some supper. Mrs. Garcia usually tends to cooking, but she's visiting her sister this week." While water heated, Levi showed Christine where to find towels and soap. Soon steam rose from the wash basin, and Christine gratefully cleaned away the dust of travel. The hot water eased some of her saddle soreness, though she knew she'd be stiff come morning. Levi kept his attention on the cook stove, giving her privacy as she washed. The smell of beans and salt pork soon filled the cabin. "Ain't fancy cooking," he apologized, "but it'll fill the belly." "It smells wonderful," Christine assured him. She settled at the table, watching as he dished up 2 plates. We should return to town tomorrow, shouldn't we? To get copies of those papers? Wise thinking. Levi agreed, setting a plate before her. Best to have everything proper and documented. He paused, then added quietly, I'll see you safely there and back. They ate in comfortable silence as darkness gathered outside. After they'd washed the dishes together, Levi lit a lantern and placed it in the window. Light helps lost travelers find their way. He explained. Been doing it since I first settled here. He picked up his hat. I'll leave you to your rest now, Mrs. Thatcher. Christine, she said softly. Please call me Christine. He nodded, a small smile touching his face. Rest well then, Christine. He stepped onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind him. In the quiet that followed, Christine heard his low voice speaking a brief prayer, asking blessing and protection for the stranger under my roof. Tears pricked her eyes at this simple act of faith. She knelt beside the rope rug, her own prayers rising in the lantern-lit darkness. Lord, she whispered, please help me see your hand in all this. Turn this refuge into direction for my path. The patchwork quilt welcomed her when she finally climbed into bed, and she fell asleep to the sound of night wind in the cottonwoods and Levi's quiet presence on the porch beyond the door. Dawn crept over Boone Ranch as roosters announced the new day. Christine woke to the unfamiliar sounds of livestock and the aroma of coffee brewing. She smoothed her hair, straightened her dress, and stepped into the main room where Levi stood at the stove. Morning, he greeted, gesturing to the coffee pot. Thought I might show you how we make it out here. Trick is keeping it from getting bitter. Christine watched carefully as he demonstrated. You wait till the water's just about to boil, then add the grounds gentle-like. He explained. Let it steep, but don't let it boil hard. That's what makes it bitter. The resulting brew was surprisingly smooth. They shared it with yesterday's biscuits while morning light filled the cabin. Got some chores to tend, Levi said. Reckon you might want to learn your way around if you're willing. I'd like that, Christine replied, rolling up her sleeves. In the barn, Levi showed her how to properly fork hay into the mangers. Not too much at once, he advised. Better to give less more often than waste it. He demonstrated the heavy wooden latch that kept the barn door secure. Coyotes get mighty clever if they learn there's easy pickings. Got to keep everything shut up tight. They were checking the livestock pens when a yearling calf decided to make a break for freedom. The gangly creature slipped through a gap and went galloping across the yard, tail high. Headed off toward the corner, Levi called, moving to block one escape route. Christine gathered her skirts and hurried to help, trying to anticipate where the calf might run. The yearling wheeled and ducked, but between them they managed to guide it back toward the pen. When Levi finally got the gate secured, Christine found herself laughing, breathless from the chase. You've got good instincts, Levi said, smiling. Most folks would have just run straight at it. By noon, they'd finished the morning chores. Levi brought out bread and apple butter, and they sat in the shade of the cabin to eat. A thoughtful look crossed his weathered face as he broke the bread. There's something you should know, he said quietly. Been helping a child in town when I can. Little girl named Nita, half Comanche. Her pa was a drover who passed last fall from fever. Christine listened as he continued. She comes by sometimes for books and a meal. Smart as a whip, but folks in town. He shook his head. They call her names, make her feel unwelcome. Ain't right, treating a child that way. No, it isn't, Christine agreed softly, thinking of her own feelings of being unwanted. The afternoon brought clouds stacking high in the western sky. Wind rustled through the cottonwoods, making the branches creak and sway. As dusk approached, Christine was helping Levi check the garden fence when a small figure appeared at the fence line. The child stood hesitantly, wearing a hat too big for her head and clutching a book to her chest. Her single dark braid was dusty, and her dress, though clean, showed signs of wear. "Evening, Nita," Levi called gently. "Come on up to the house." The girl approached cautiously, her eyes taking in Christine's presence. Up close, Christine could see the book was a torn school primer. "You feeling all right?" Levi asked, crouching to her level. "Not sick or anything?" Nita shook her head. "Just hungry," she whispered, then glanced toward town with wide eyes. "This here's Miss Christine," Levi said. "She's staying with us for a spell." Christine smiled warmly. "Would you like some stew? I was just about to warm some up." She noticed the girl's dusty face and hands. "And perhaps you'd like to wash up first?" "I could help you fix that ribbon in your hair, too." Nita's hand went to the frayed ribbon holding her braid. After a moment's consideration, she nodded. Inside, Christine heated water while Levi stirred up the stove and put on the stew pot. She helped Nita wash her face and hands, then gently undid the tired ribbon and braid. While she worked tangles from the girl's long, dark hair with careful fingers, she hummed an old hymn her mother used to sing. "There now," she said, securing the freshly plaited braid with a clean ribbon from her own things. "Much better, isn't it?" The child touched the neat braid and managed a small smile. Over bowls of hot stew, she gradually relaxed, though she said little. Christine noticed how carefully she handled the spoon, how she kept the torn primer close beside her. When the dishes were done, Christine made up a soft pallet near the stove with spare blankets. "We'll all ride to town together after breakfast," she told Nita. "We need to copy some papers at the courthouse, and perhaps we can see about getting your book mended too." Nita looked uncertain until Levi added, "I'll be with you both the whole time." The girl nodded then, settling onto the pallet while Christine tucked the blankets around her. In the lamplight, her young face already showed less wariness, softened by simple kindness and a full belly. Christine caught Levi's eye across the room. His expression held approval and something warmer, something that made her heart beat a little faster. She understood then that by opening her heart to this child, she had revealed more of herself than words could tell. Dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and golds as 3 riders set out from Boone Ranch. Levi led on his sorrel, while Christine and Nita shared the gentler mare, the girl seated securely in front. The morning air held a hint of sage and prairie dust as they followed the wagon road toward San Miguel Junction at an easy walk. As they approached the outskirts of town, Christine lowered her black veil, grateful for its shield against curious eyes. The sound of children's voices made Nita stiffen. A group of boys lounging near the water trough pointed and snickered. "Look, it's the half-breed," one called out. "Can't even walk to school proper, needs to ride like a fine lady." Levi reined his horse around, fixing the boys with a stern look that sent them scattering. Nita's small shoulders remained tense, but she sat straight, chin lifted. Christine gave her a gentle squeeze. "Pay them no mind," she whispered. "We have important business to tend." They dismounted at the hitching post near the courthouse. The recorder's office occupied a small room that smelled of dust and ink. Morning light filtered through grimy windows, catching motes in its beam. The clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, shuffled through leather-bound volumes at Christine's request. "Proxy marriage license and inheritance papers for Mrs. Christine Thatcher, formerly Whitford," he muttered, making notes. "2 certified copies, that'll be 50 cents. Christine counted out the coins carefully. The official stamps and ribbons made the documents look more substantial, more real. She tucked them into her reticule with trembling fingers. "Ready?" Levi asked quietly. At her nod, they stepped back into the morning sun. Across the dusty street stood Thatcher Mercantile, its windows shuttered despite the hour. Miles Thatcher lounged against the front post with two rough-looking men Christine didn't recognize. His voice carried clearly as they approached. "Store's done for anyway," he was saying. "That mail-order widow means to close it up, sell to the railroad. All those years of my brother's work gone to—" "That's not true." Christine's voice shook but held firm as she stepped forward. Heads turned, and Miles straightened, his face darkening. "I intend to keep these doors open," she continued, drawing strength from Levi's solid presence behind her. "To hire honest help and settle real debts, not invented ones." Miles took a step toward her, but Levi shifted slightly, and the smaller man thought better of it. "You've no idea how to run a store," Miles sneered. "Perhaps not yet," Christine acknowledged. "But I can learn, and I can read a ledger well enough to know when numbers don't add up, true?" She moved past him to the door, producing the key the judge had given her. The lock turned with a solid click. Inside, the store smelled of tobacco, leather, and dust. Crates of nails lined one wall, barrels of dry goods another. Smoke had stained the ceiling above the pot-bellied stove, and ledgers were stacked haphazardly on the counter. A woman emerged from the back room, thin, grey-haired, with sharp eyes and capable hands. "Mrs. Hattie Pike," she introduced herself. "I've been keeping inventory since Mr. Thatcher took ill." "Would you be willing to continue?" Christine asked. "For fair wages, properly recorded?" Mrs. Pike's eyes brightened. "I would indeed, Mrs. Thatcher. These shelves need a woman's touch, and I know every item in stock." Christine was examining the latest ledger when a shadow fell across the counter. Mr. Lyle stood there, elegant despite the dust on his boots, a contract in his manicured hands. "Mrs. Thatcher," he said smoothly, "I've taken the liberty of drawing up revised terms. The railroad is prepared to offer—" Levi stepped forward, took the paper, and folded it without reading a word. "Much obliged," he said, handing it back, "but the lady's already stated her intentions." Mr. Lyle's smile tightened. "Progress can't be held back forever, Mr. Boone. The rail line will come through, one way or another." "Maybe so," Christine said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "But it won't be through my store, not today." They spent another hour with Mrs. Pike, reviewing inventory and making plans to reopen after Sunday services. Nita helped sort penny candy into jars, her quick hands and sharp eyes catching details the adults missed. By the time they closed up, the sun had passed its peak. The ride home was slower, all three tired from the day's events. Long shadows stretched across the prairie as they approached Boone Ranch. Near the gate, Christine drew her horse to a halt. "I meant what I said in town," she told Levi, who had stopped beside her. "I won't be bullied into selling. Not by Miles, not by Mr. Lyle, not by anyone." The setting sun caught gold in her hair as she lifted her chin, and Levi nodded, respect clear in his steady gaze. Nita, half asleep against Christine, smiled faintly as they rode the final distance to the house, where lamplight already glowed welcome in the gathering dusk. The church bell's clear tone rang across San Miguel Junction that Sunday morning, calling the faithful to worship. Sunlight streamed through the sanctuary's simple windows, catching dust motes that danced above the wooden pews. The one-room building held the clean, familiar scent of pine soap from yesterday's scrubbing, mixed with the musty sweetness of well-worn hymnals. Christine smoothed her grey dress, conscious of the darned sleeve at her wrist. Beside her, in the front pew, Nita sat straight-backed in her freshly pressed calico, her dark hair neatly braided with a new ribbon. Levi took his place next to them, looking somewhat uncomfortable in his brushed jacket, but his presence steadied them both. Reverend Josiah Hale stood before the congregation, his Bible open to the Book of Ruth. His voice carried clear and strong through the humble space. "Where you go, I will go," he read, the ancient words falling like gentle rain. "And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." The Reverend's eyes met Christine's for a moment. Ruth's loyalty to Naomi shows us that family isn't always bound by blood. He continued, "Sometimes the Lord brings strangers together to make them kin. Through faith and steadfast love, the foreign woman became part of God's own people." Christine felt Nita's small hand slip into hers. She squeezed it gently, aware of the whispers that had followed them in. But as the service progressed, those murmurs softened. When it came time to share the peace, several hands reached out to them with genuine warmth. After the final hymn, the congregation spilled out into the bright morning air. Members of the ladies' circle surrounded Christine, pressing warm cornbread wrapped in clean cloth into her hands. "For your Sunday table," Mrs. Henderson said with a kind smile. "We always make extra." "Much obliged," Christine replied, touched by the gesture. She noticed Mr. Lyle standing by the hitching rail, watching the exchanges with calculated interest. His presence cast a shadow over the morning's peace. The afternoon found them back at Boone Ranch, where quiet settled over the land like a comfortable blanket. In the kitchen, Christine showed Nita how to cut biscuits with the rim of a tin cup. The girl's serious concentration brought a smile to Christine's face. "Not too thick," she guided gently. "About the width of your finger." Flour dusted their aprons and the rough wooden table as they worked. Through the window, they could see Levi replacing a broken fence rail in the north pasture. His steady movements spoke of years of practice, each strike of the hammer precise and sure. The warm scent of baking filled the cabin. Hope drifted through the air like the flour dust catching the sunlight, settling soft and sweet around them. This, Christine thought, felt like the beginning of something real, something lasting. Nita arranged the golden biscuits in a cloth-lined basket, while Christine wiped down the table. The sun had begun its descent, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The peaceful moment shattered as hoofbeats thundered past the lane, heading toward town at a desperate gallop. Christine's stomach twisted with sudden dread. She moved to the window, straining to see through the gathering dusk. Minutes ticked by, marked only by the quiet tick of the mantel clock. Then she saw it, an orange smear blooming on the horizon, bright against the darkening sky. "Fire," she whispered, her heart dropping. "In town!" Levi burst through the door, his expression grim. "The mercantile," he said, buckling on his gun belt. "Someone's seen smoke coming from the back room." Christine pressed a hand to her mouth. "All those ledgers, the evidence of Miles's false debts. I'm not riding in to fight," Levi assured her, checking his single-action revolver before holstering it. "But they'll need every hand they can get on the bucket line if they hope to save any of the buildings." He paused at the door. "You two stay here where it's safe." "No," Christine said firmly. "Those books, those papers, they're my proof. We're coming. We can help carry water, tend to people." Levi studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "The wagon, then." "It's steadier than riding double in the dark." While he saddled his horse, Christine and Nita quickly gathered what might be needed. Blankets, clean rags for bandages, a jug of fresh water. They climbed into the wagon, prayer already forming on their lips as Levi swung into his saddle. "Dear Lord," Christine whispered as they set off at a trot. "Protect those in harm's way tonight. Guide our hands to help where needed." The orange glow grew brighter with each turn of the wagon wheels, leading them toward whatever chaos awaited in town. Nita pressed close to Christine's side, both of them holding tight as the wagon rocked over the rutted road. Ahead, Levi's broad shoulders were set with determination as he led the way through the gathering darkness. The night air filled with shouts and the sharp crack of burning timber as Christine, Levi, and Nita arrived in San Miguel Junction. Orange flames danced against the dark sky, casting wild shadows across the dusty street. The mercantile's windows glowed like demon eyes, smoke pouring from beneath the eaves. "Water! We need more water!" someone bellowed from the growing crowd. Levi leaped from his horse, tossing the reins over the courthouse rail. "Stay together," he told Christine and Nita as they climbed down from the wagon. Then he rushed to join the bucket brigade, his broad shoulders pushing through the crowd to take his place in line. Christine spotted Mrs. Pike, the store clerk, wringing her hands near the water pump. "The ledgers!" the widow cried. "All our records!" "The safe," Christine called back. "Are they in the safe?" "Yes, praise the Lord, but the key—" A crash from inside the building drowned out her words. Christine grabbed 2 empty buckets and nodded to Nita. "Come on, we can help." They found their place among the school moms and mothers who had formed a relay line from the horse trough. Christine passed buckets hand to hand, her arms aching as water sloshed over her skirts. The night air grew thick with smoke and steam. "There!" A man's voice cut through the chaos. "I saw him skulking round the alley earlier today. The Boone fellow." Christine's head snapped up. Miles Thatcher stood at the edge of the crowd, pointing at Levi. "After church," Miles continued, his voice carrying, hanging about like he was planning something. "That's a lie!" Christine shouted, but her words were lost in the growing murmurs. Sheriff Cole pushed through the crowd, his badge catching the firelight. "Now hold on," he began, but several men were already pressing forward. "Can't trust a man who harbors half-breeds," someone called out. Nita pressed closer to Christine's side, trembling. Levi stood his ground, passing another bucket down the line. "Sheriff," Miles pressed, "you can't ignore this. Man's got a gun and suspicious timing." "I was mending fence all afternoon," Levi said quietly. "Ask anyone who rode past my property." But the damage was done. The crowd's mood had shifted like wind-blown smoke. Sheriff Cole's weathered face showed his struggle as he approached Levi. "I'm sorry, Boone," he said, voice heavy with regret. "Best come with me until daylight sorts truth from smoke, for everyone's safety." Levi's jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. Without protest, he unbuckled his gun belt and handed it to the sheriff. "This ain't right," Christine protested, stepping forward. "He came to help." "It's just until morning, ma'am," Sheriff Cole assured her. "Clean cell, and we'll telegraph the judge at first light." Christine watched helplessly as the sheriff led Levi away. The big man's steps were steady, his head held high despite the whispers that followed him. "Keep working!" someone shouted. "Fire ain't out yet." For another hour they fought the flames. Christine's arms felt leaden, but she kept passing buckets. Nita stayed close, helping where she could. When someone stumbled back from the heat with scalded hands, Christine led them to the pump, tearing strips from her petticoat to wrap the burns. Finally, the flames began to die. The mercantile's roof had collapsed inward with a sound like thunder, but the brick walls still stood. More importantly, the iron safe remained visible through the smoky ruins, apparently intact. As the crowd thinned, Christine took Nita's hand. "Come on," she said softly. "We're not leaving him alone in there." The jail occupied the back half of the sheriff's office. They found Sheriff Cole at his desk, looking troubled as he wrote in his logbook. He glanced up as they entered. "Mom, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do!" Christine interrupted firmly. "We'll wait right here." She settled into a straight-backed chair and Nita curled up beside her, wrapped in Christine's shawl. Through the office door, they could see the sky beginning to lighten from black to grey. "I'll send Billy to the telegraph office soon as it opens," the sheriff promised. "Judge Wilson will want to hear about this directly." Christine nodded, then stood and walked to the cell where Levi sat on a narrow cot. His clothes still smelled of smoke, but his eyes were clear and steady when they met hers. She reached through the bars, and his large hand engulfed her smaller one. "I'll find the truth," she whispered fiercely. "Before this day is out, I swear it. I know you will." He replied softly. The first rays of Monday's sun crept through the office window, painting the worn floorboards with strips of gold. Outside, the town began to stir, while inside the jail, Christine held tight to Levi's hand, her resolve as solid as the iron bars between them. The Monday sun had barely cleared the eastern hills when Christine strode toward the telegraph office, a steaming cup of coffee cradled in her hands. Her boots clicked against the wooden sidewalk, each step purposeful despite her weary body. Inside the small office, young Billy Thompson slouched over his desk, fighting sleep after a long night watching the fire. His eyes widened at the sight of the coffee. "Morning, Billy," Christine said softly, setting the cup before him. "I need messages sent right away, urgent ones." Billy straightened, wrapping his fingers around the warm cup. "Yes, ma'am. Where to?" "First to Judge Wilson, then to any United States Marshal riding this telegraph line." Christine placed a neat stack of coins on the desk. "Mark them urgent, if you would." "Yes, ma'am," Billy replied, already reaching for his key. "I'll send them straight away." The telegraph began its steady clicking as Christine stepped back into the street. Morning light revealed the full extent of the mercantile's damage. Blackened walls reaching towards the sky like broken teeth, the collapsed roof a jumble of charred timbers. The acrid smell of wet ash hung heavy in the air. Mrs. Hattie Pike stood guard near the safe, her grey hair escaping its pins, her eyes red-rimmed but alert. She nodded as Christine approached. "Nobody's touched it," Mrs. Pike assured her. Though that Miles Thatcher came sniffing around at dawn, Sheriff Cole sent him off. "Thank you, Mrs. Pike." Christine squeezed the older woman's hand. "Shall we see what survived?" Together they worked the combination, numbers Christine had memorized from the court papers. The safe's heavy door swung open with a groan, revealing stacks of ledgers. The outer pages were damp from the bucket brigade, but the writing remained clear. Christine settled on an overturned crate and began to read, her finger tracing each line. Mrs. Pike peered over her shoulder, occasionally murmuring confirmation of dates and amounts. "Here," Christine said suddenly. "Look at these entries." She pointed to a cluster of numbers. All these debts assigned to Miles, dated within 2 days of Ephraim's death. The handwriting's different too, more hurried. Mrs. Pike adjusted her spectacles. "That's not Mr. Ephraim's hand, that's certain. He wrote neat as printing, even when ill." Christine pulled a small notebook from her pocket and began copying the suspicious entries in her precise handwriting. The numbers told a story of their own. Large sums suddenly transferred, as if someone had been preparing for just this moment. A shadow fell across the page. Nita stood in the doorway, her small face serious. "Miss Christine?" "I found something." The girl led them to the alley behind the store, where morning light slanted between the buildings. Nita crouched near the back door, pointing to something half hidden in the dirt. "There," she said softly. "Smells wrong." Christine knelt beside her. A broken metal handle lay partially buried, the sharp edges of its break still fresh. The distinct odor of kerosene clung to the metal. "Sheriff Cole," Mrs. Pike called out, spotting the lawman on his morning rounds. "You'll want to see this." The sheriff approached, his boots crunching on the debris. He studied the handle, then carefully lifted it into a canvas bag. "Could be important," he said, frowning. "Good eyes, little miss." Nita ducked her head, but Christine saw the flash of pride in the child's eyes. With her notebook full of carefully copied figures, Christine led their small group towards the church. Reverend Hale was sweeping ash from his front steps when they arrived. Come in," he said, gesturing toward his study. "I've coffee brewing." Inside, surrounded by well-worn books and the familiar smell of pipe tobacco, Christine laid out what they'd found. The preacher listened intently, his weathered hands folded on his desk. "The ledger entries trouble me," he said finally. "Such convenient timing speaks to something planned, but—" He held up a cautioning hand. "We must move carefully. Truth is like a wagon on a muddy grade. Push too hard, too fast, and you'll only sink deeper." "What do you suggest?" Christine asked. "Take your findings to Sheriff Cole. Let the law work its course." The Reverend's kind eyes held hers. "And guard against rash accusations, even when your heart burns for justice. Sometimes the slowest path is the surest." Christine nodded, gathering her notes. The morning was warming as they walked back to the jail. Inside, she found Levi sitting on his cot, reading from a small Bible. He looked up as she approached the cell. "You've been busy," he said softly, noting her ink-stained fingers. Christine told him everything. The suspicious ledger entries, the broken kerosene can handle, Reverend Hale's counsel for patients. Levi listened carefully, his face thoughtful. "The Reverend's right," he said finally. "Let truth work like spring rain, steady and sure." "I'll try," Christine promised. She glanced at Nita, who stood quietly near the door. "Though I think our young friend here might have seen more than she's told us." Levi's eyes met hers through the bars. "Patience," he reminded her gently. "And prayer." "Both," Christine agreed, reaching through to squeeze his hand. "I promise both." The jail clock struck noon, its chimes echoing through the quiet room. Outside, San Miguel Junction was coming fully awake, unaware that truth was already stirring in its dusty streets, like seeds pushing through spring soil. The first light of Tuesday morning painted the parsonage kitchen in soft, golden hues. Reverend Josiah Hale stood at his worn stove, carefully pouring coffee into 3 cups. A large pottery mug for himself, a delicate china cup for Christine, and a smaller tin cup with milk for Nita. The aroma of fresh bread filled the small room, warm and comforting against the early morning chill. Christine sat at the scarred kitchen table, her hands folded in her lap, while Nita perched uncertainly on the edge of her chair. The preacher's usual calm seemed troubled as he settled into his seat, his weathered fingers wrapped around his coffee mug. "There's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice heavy with old regret. "Something from my past that bears on our present trouble." He took a slow sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. "Before I took up the cloth, I worked as a paymaster for the railroad. My job was settling claims, paying folk to move when the railroad wanted their land." Christine leaned forward slightly, her eyes intent on the preacher's face. "The amounts offered were never fair," Reverend Hale continued, "but we had ways of making sure people took them. Legal pressure, manufactured debts, threats of condemnation." His voice grew softer. "I told myself it was just business, just progress, until one day I watched a widow and her children pack their wagon because I'd helped force them off land they'd worked for 20 years. He set his mug down with careful precision. "I left that job the next day. Couldn't live with the shame of it. Took to preaching instead, trying to make right what I'd helped make wrong." Rising from his chair, the Reverend walked to a shelf and pulled down a leather document case. "But I learned things in that work. How to read contracts for hidden traps, how to trace money through books, how to spot when papers have been changed after signing." He met Christine's gaze directly. "I won't stand silent while such methods are used against you or anyone else in this town." The clock on the wall ticked steadily as his words settled in the room. Christine nodded slowly, understanding blooming in her eyes. "Now then," the Reverend said, turning to Nita with gentler voice, "would you like some warm bread, child?" Mrs. Hale baked it fresh this morning. Nita's eyes darted between the adults, but the smell of fresh bread and the preacher's kind manner seemed to ease her tension. She nodded, accepting a thick slice spread with butter. As she ate, Reverend Hale spoke to her quietly, asking simple questions about Sunday evening, where she'd been during church service, what she'd seen while walking home. His manner was unhurried, grandfatherly. Between bites of bread, Nita's story emerged in whispers. She'd finished her chores early and come to town, hoping to slip into the back of church. But before service ended, she'd seen Miles Thatcher behind the store. He'd carried a lantern, though it wasn't fully dark yet. The sharp smell of kerosene had burned her nose. "I hid," she said softly, looking down at her empty plate. "Behind the water barrel. Was scared he'd see me." Reverend Hale reached for a fresh sheet of paper and his good pen. "You're very brave to tell us this, Nita. Would you let me write down what you saw? Sheriff Cole needs to know the truth." Nita nodded, and the Reverend carefully recorded her account, reading each line back to her for confirmation. When finished, he asked her to make her mark at the bottom, which she did with solemn concentration. The morning had warmed by the time they left the parsonage. Their small group walked slowly toward the sheriff's office, Nita staying close to Christine's side. The town was beginning to stir, shutters opening and smoke rising from breakfast fires. Sheriff Cole was at his desk, looking over telegraph replies. He stood when they entered, noting their serious faces. "Reverend," he said, nodding. "Mrs. Whitford, what brings you so early?" The Reverend placed Nita's statement on the sheriff's desk. "New evidence, Abner. The kind that needs careful consideration." The sheriff read the paper slowly, then looked at Nita. "You're certain about what you saw, child?" "Yes, sir," Nita whispered, but her chin lifted slightly. Sheriff Cole sank back in his chair, conflict clear on his face. He was a man caught between duty and politics, between conscience and the pressure of powerful men. "I can hold Levi another day legal-like," he said finally. "Time enough to send more wires and have another talk with Miles Thatcher." He looked at Reverend Hale. "You'll vouch for the girl's character?" "With my own good name," the Reverend replied firmly. The sheriff nodded slowly. "I'll send for the federal marshal again. This is getting beyond local matters." From the cells behind them came the sound of movement. Levi stood at his bars, having heard everything. His eyes met Christine's with quiet encouragement. "Thank you, Sheriff," Christine said softly, "for giving truth time to work." They left the jail as the morning sun climbed higher. Reverend Hale pulled several papers from his coat pocket, notices he'd prepared earlier. "The town needs to hear facts, not rumors," he said. "We'll call a meeting at the church tonight, let people ask their questions and hear straight answers." Together, he and Christine moved through town, pinning the notices to posts and walls. The church bell struck noon as they placed the last one, its clear tones ringing across the dusty streets of San Miguel Junction. "Truth will have its day," Reverend Hale said quietly, stepping back from the notice board. "We just need to give it room to grow." The wind caught the edges of the papers, making them flutter like white flags in the midday sun. The town meeting notice faced the square boldly, calling citizens to gather that evening in the house of God, where facts would speak louder than fear. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across San Miguel Junction's dusty streets as Christine arranged hymnals in the church pews. Her fingers trembled slightly, knowing what the evening might bring. The crunch of boots on gravel made her turn. Mr. Lyle stood in the doorway, his silk vest pristine despite the dust. He moved toward her with practiced smoothness, a leather document case tucked under one arm. "Mrs. Whitford," he said, tipping his hat. "A moment of your time?" Christine straightened, keeping the wooden pew between them. "The meeting starts in an hour, Mr. Lyle. You're welcome to speak then. This requires privacy." He withdrew papers from his case, the fresh ink barely dry. "A new draft of condemnation proceedings. The railroad is prepared to offer immediate payment, cash in hand." His voice lowered. "It would end all this unpleasantness." Christine studied his face in the slanting sunlight. "You mean it would bury the truth?" "Truth is a costly thing, madam." He placed the papers on the pew. "Consider how much more trouble might come before this settles. The only trouble here is what men like you and Miles Thatcher manufacture." Christine's voice remained steady. "You're welcome to stay for the meeting. Every fact will be read aloud, and God's people can judge what's true." Mr. Lyle's smile tightened. He gathered his papers with precise movements. "You're making a grave mistake." "No, sir," Christine replied. "I'm making a stand." As dusk settled over the town, people began filing into the church. Ranch wives in faded calico sat beside merchants' families in store-bought cloth. Railroad workers, still grimy from their shifts, filled the back rows. The air grew thick with the smell of lamp oil and working bodies. Reverend Hale stood at the simple pulpit, Christine and Mrs. Haddie Pike seated nearby. Sheriff Cole leaned against the wall by the door, watching faces in the crowd. Nita huddled in the front pew, her small form nearly hidden. "Brothers and sisters," the Reverend began, his voice carrying to the rafters, "we gather tonight to seek truth and justice." He lifted the store ledgers. "These books tell a troubling story." One by one, he read the entries aloud. Sudden debts assigned to Miles Thatcher within 48 hours of his brother's death. Dates, amounts, and signatures that didn't match earlier pages. The crowd stirred as patterns emerged. "That ain't proof of nothing," someone called from the back. "Perhaps not alone." Reverend Hale agreed. He produced the broken kerosene can handle found in the alley. "But evidence grows, like winter wheat, one blade at a time." Miles Thatcher pushed to his feet, face flushed. "You can't trust that Indian girl's wild tales. She's nothing but a—" "That child," Mrs. Haddie Pike's voice cut through his bluster like a knife, "has more honest courage than some men I could name." She rose, straight-backed as a prairie pine. "I've kept books for 20 years, Mr. Thatcher. Those ledger changes are as clear as Sunday scripture to trained eyes." A murmur rippled through the pews. Women in the back row exchanged knowing looks. They'd seen Mrs. Pike's meticulous work in church accounts for years. Sheriff Cole stepped forward. "I appreciate all this testimony, but the law needs more than suspicions to free a man." He looked apologetically at Christine. "Even strong ones." Through it all, Mr. Lyle had sat silent, watching. As the Reverend called for a closing hymn, he slipped out like smoke through the door. The meeting dispersed into the dark night. Lanterns bobbed like fireflies as families walked home, voices low in discussion. Christine gathered her shawl and notes, thanking those who lingered to offer support. The jail was quiet when she arrived, just the tick of the wall clock and the scratch of her pen as she drafted a telegram. Levi watched through the cell bars as she wrote, her letters careful and clear in the lamplight. "To Federal Land Office Investigator, Denver Station." She read softly. evidence of fraud and arson concerning Thatcher mercantile inheritance dispute. Request immediate investigation. Multiple witnesses prepared to testify. Signed, Christine Whitford, legal heir. The tide's turning, Levi said quietly. But not loose yet. No. Christine folded the telegram carefully. But truth flows like water. It finds its way through any crack. The courthouse clock struck midnight as she handed the telegram to the sleepy clerk, paid the fee, and watched him tap out the message. The dots and dashes seemed to echo her prayer. Let justice come. Let truth prevail. She returned to her vigil chair in the jail's front room, drawing her shawl close against the night chill. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but for now she could rest in knowing they'd taken one more step toward right. The Wednesday morning sun cast long shadows across San Miguel Junction's railway platform as the 10:15 train wheezed to a stop. Steam billowed around the wheels, and among the few passengers who descended, one man stood out. United States Marshal Edgar Pike stepped onto the wooden planks with purpose, his leather satchel heavy with federal writs and documents. Sheriff Cole met him at the station, hat in hand. "Much obliged for coming so quick, Marshal." "Fraud doesn't age well," Pike replied, his weathered face stern. "Let's see these ledgers." They walked to the sheriff's office, where Reverend Hale waited with the mercantile books spread across a scarred wooden table. Mrs. Hattie Pike had arranged them in precise chronological order, marking suspicious entries with small paper flags. Marshal Pike settled into a chair, drawing out his spectacles. "Show me these supposed debts first." Sheriff Cole pointed to entries dated just after Ephraim Thatcher's death. "Here's where it starts. Miles claiming his brother owed him substantial sums." The marshal's finger traced each line, comparing dates and signatures. His eyes narrowed at the notations. "Reverend, you mentioned experience with paymaster tricks." Reverend Hale leaned forward, pointing to specific entries. "Yes, sir. See here, the ink shade changes mid-entry, and these dates? The notary stamp bleeds differently than earlier pages. Someone's been backdating." "Deliberate smudging, too," Marshal Pike muttered, pulling out a small magnifying glass. "Trying to mask different handwriting." The morning light streamed through the office windows as they worked, casting stark shadows across damning evidence. After an hour of careful examination, Marshal Pike straightened. "Sheriff, I want Miles Thatcher's office opened. Now." They crossed the street to the Mercantile's undamaged office. The lock yielded to the sheriff's key, and they stepped into the musty space. Marshal Pike moved with practiced efficiency, checking drawers and cabinets. Behind a false panel in the desk, they found what they sought: a seal press, unauthorized and crude, meant to mimic official stamps. In the back room, empty kerosene tins lay poorly hidden beneath canvas tarps, their handles matching the one found in the alley. "That's enough," Marshal Pike said grimly. "Let's get that innocent man out of jail." The cell block was cool and dim when they entered. Levi stood as Marshal Pike approached, his face composed despite 3 days of confinement. "Mr. Boone," the marshal said, fitting the key to the lock. "My deputy arrived on the midnight train. He reported seeing you working the bucket line when the fire was at its worst." The cell door swung open with a creak. "You have my sincere apologies for this inconvenience." Levi stepped out, ducking his tall frame under the doorway. "No apology needed, Marshal. Law's got to work its course." Outside, word spread quickly. Townsfolk gathered in small clusters, many looking ashamed as Levi emerged into the sunlight. Christine stood waiting, her eyes bright with unshed tears of relief. Nita peeked out from behind her skirts, a tentative smile on her face. The peaceful moment shattered as a shout rang out from the livery stable. "He's running!" Miles Thatcher had slipped away during the investigation, mounting a horse and spurring it toward the town's edge. but he'd reckoned without Marshal Pike's experience. The federal officer's whistle brought his deputy running from the telegraph office, and the two lawmen quickly cut off Miles's escape route. The would-be fugitive was brought back in handcuffs, his fine coat dusty and torn. Marshal Pike read the charges clearly, so all could hear. Miles Thatcher, you are under arrest for fraud, forgery of official documents, and arson. You'll be held for federal prosecution. As Miles was led away, the marshal turned his attention to Mr. Lyle, who had been watching from the shadow of the hotel porch. Sir, I'll need you to remain in town. We have questions about certain railroad condemnation practices. The railway agent's smooth manner cracked slightly. I assure you, Marshal. Save it for the official interview. Pike cut in. 2 o'clock sharp, at the sheriff's office. The autumn morning had warmed to noon, the sky a clear, clean blue above the town. Outside the jail, Levi stood quietly as Christine approached. His big hands, rough from ranch work, gently took hers. The touch spoke volumes, of trust vindicated, of faith rewarded, of something deeper growing between them. Nita stepped forward shyly, and without hesitation slipped her small fingers into their joined hands. The three stood together as the courthouse bell began to toll the noon hour, each strike ringing out across a town where justice had prevailed. Around them, the townsfolk began to disperse, their whispered conversations now touched with reflection rather than accusation. The truth had come to light, as truth always does, and with it came the chance for the community to heal and grow stronger. The last bell tone faded into the crisp autumn air. Free men and women stood together in the noonday sun, their shadows stretching toward a future built on honesty and trust, rather than greed and deception. The Thursday sun rose over San Miguel Junction, its gentle rays filtering through the mercantile's broken windows. The acrid scent of smoke had begun to fade, carried away by the crisp morning breeze. Inside the damaged store, neighbors worked shoulder to shoulder, their brooms scraping against the wooden floors as they swept away the grey ash. Mrs. Hattie Pike stood at her desk, carefully writing in her neat hand on a fresh sheet of paper. Thatcher Mercantile, reopen soon, she wrote, adding underneath, under management of Mrs. Christine Whitford. She tacked the notice to the front door, smoothing it with pride. The morning peace shattered when Mr. Lyle strode through the door, his polished boots leaving prints in the swept ash. He held out an official-looking document. Mrs. Whitford, I've filed a formal condemnation petition. The railroad requires this property. We'll have a hearing tomorrow. Christine's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. I still refuse to sell. She found Marshal Pike in the sheriff's office, studying Miles Thatcher's forged documents. Marshal, how do I fight this condemnation? The federal lawman looked up from his work. You'll need affidavits showing the store's value to the community. Gather statements about public service. Bring your proxy marriage certificate and prove the mercantile serves the common good. Reverend Hale sat at his desk in the parsonage, penning his statement with careful consideration. This establishment, he wrote, provides essential goods and honest commerce to our growing town. Its loss would create undue hardship for families who rely upon its fair practices and necessary supplies. At the schoolhouse, 3 teachers gathered to write their own testimonies. The mercantile stocks primers, slates, and pencils. Miss Thompson noted, without it, our children's education would suffer greatly. Ranch hands and farmers came forward throughout the morning. We need feed and nails, old Tom Weber declared, his weathered hands gripping his hat as he dictated to Mrs. Hattie. Can't run stock without proper supplies close at hand. Near noon, Christine stood at the telegraph office, counting out coins for an urgent message to Pueblo. The reply came swiftly. Attorney Silas Trent will arrive midnight train. Stop. Experienced in railroad cases. Stop. The afternoon sun beat down as Levi and Christine worked on the mercantile's roof. Their hammers rang out steady rhythms as they secured boards over the fire-damaged section. Below them, Nita sat cross-legged on a crate, carefully counting nails into small piles. 57, 58. She murmured, proud of her task. Her small fingers moved surely, sorting the different sizes with careful attention. The day hummed with purpose. Townspeople came and went, adding their names to affidavits, offering help with repairs, sharing stories of times the store had carried them through hard seasons. Mrs. Haddy recorded it all in her precise hand, building a testament to the mercantile's importance in their community. As evening approached, Christine surveyed the day's progress. The roof was patched, the floors were clean, and a stack of sworn statements testified to the store's vital role in San Miguel Junction. She felt bone-weary but satisfied. The trio rode back to Boone Ranch as the sun set, Nita drowsy in the saddle before them. After settling the horses and ensuring Nita was tucked safely in bed, Christine and Levi stepped out onto the porch. Night settled over the land like a soft blanket. Coyotes called in the distance, their wild songs echoing across the open range. Stars pricked through the darkening sky one by one, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage. Levi stood quiet beside Christine, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the lamplight spilling from the window. She could sense something in his silence, a question hovering unspoken. He turned toward her, his eyes soft with meaning, then seemed to think better of it. "Let's do tomorrow right," he said simply. Christine nodded, her heart beating steady and sure. Together they stood watching the night deepen, drawing strength from the quiet and each other's presence as they prepared for the battle ahead. The San Miguel Junction courthouse buzzed with anticipation that Friday morning. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long rectangles across the wooden floor where townsfolk packed the benches shoulder to shoulder. The air felt heavy with tension and the lingering scent of tobacco from nervous men chewing their cigars outside. Attorney Silas Trent cut an impressive figure at the plaintiff's table, his moustache neatly trimmed and his eyes sharp as he arranged documents with methodical precision. Kristen sat beside him, her hands folded quietly in her lap, while Levi and Nita occupied the bench directly behind them. Mr. Lyle slouched at the defense table, his usual polish somewhat tarnished. Judge Harrison settled into his chair with a creak of wood, adjusting his spectacles as he surveyed the crowded room. "Present your case, Mr. Trent." The attorney rose smoothly, lifting a leather folder. "Your Honor, I present certified documentation of the proxy marriage between Christine Whitford and the late Ephraim Thatcher, properly witnessed and sealed in Pennsylvania." He approached the bench, each step deliberate. "Following this, I have the inheritance papers establishing Mrs. Whitford's legal title to half ownership of the Thatcher Mercantile." The judge examined each document carefully while Mr. Trent continued. "Furthermore, I have gathered 23 sworn affidavits from citizens of San Miguel Junction testifying to the essential nature of this establishment to the community's well-being." A rustle went through the crowd as Reverend Hale stood to testify. The preacher's voice carried clear and strong through the courthouse. "Your Honor, I must first disclose my own history. Years ago, I worked as a railroad paymaster, participating in practices that pushed good people from their rightful property." He paused, shoulders straight despite the weight of his confession. "That experience lets me recognize the tactics being employed here. This store serves as a lifeline for our community, from school children to ranchers, from households to businesses." Marshal Pike took the stand next, his badge catching the morning light. He gestured to a collection of items spread before him. Forged documents, the false seal press from Miles's office, and the broken kerosene can handle. "These pieces of evidence, Your Honor, tell a story of calculated fraud and intimidation. The timing of Mr. Lyle's condemnation petition correlates directly with attempts to pressure Mrs. Whitford through illegal means." The marshal's testimony drew murmurs from the crowd. Mr. Lyle shifted uncomfortably in his chair as Pike detailed the connection between the attempted fraud and the railroad's actions. Judge Harrison removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully as he reviewed the stack of papers before him. The room fell silent, waiting. Finally, he lifted his gavel. Having reviewed all evidence presented, this court finds no legitimate grounds for condemnation of the Thatcher mercantile property. The gavel struck wood with decisive force. Furthermore, Mrs. Whitford's title is hereby affirmed in full. Mr. Lyle, for your part in these predatory actions, you are fined $500, payable to the court within 30 days. A sound like distant thunder rolled through the room, a mixture of sighs, whispers, and shuffling feet as the tension broke. Christine pressed her handkerchief to her eyes, shoulders trembling with relief, while Nita squeezed her hand tight. The courthouse steps were crowded as people spilled out into the autumn sunshine. Christine paused near the top, breathing in the crisp air, when Levi touched her elbow. She turned to find him standing bare-headed, his hat clutched in his big hands, eyes full of something that made her heart skip. "Miss Christine," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've got something to ask you, and it ain't about saving anybody." He drew a deep breath. "I love who you are, your strength, your kindness, the way you stand for what's right. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Christine's eyes brightened with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes, if we can keep our door open for Nita, too." The girl in question pressed against their sides, her small face glowing with hope. Levi's large hand settled gently on her shoulder. "Wouldn't have it any other way." Reverend Hale, who had lingered nearby, stepped forward with a warm smile. "Sunday would be a fine day for vows, if you're agreeable." Mrs. Hattie Pike hurried up, beaming. "I'll bring flowers from my garden. The late roses are still blooming beautiful." The autumn day softened into evening as Levi, Christine, and Nita walked the familiar trail home to Boone Ranch. The sky above them stretched vast and blue-washed, with the first stars beginning to peek through. Their conversation drifted easily between plans for guardianship papers and arrangements for Nita's schooling. "Miss Thompson says I can start next week," Nita said, skipping between them. "She won't mind if I'm a little behind in reading." "We'll help you catch up," Christine promised, exchanging a tender look with Levi over the girl's head. Their joined hands swung gently as they walked, 3 hearts beating in time with the rhythm of their steps toward home. The early morning darkness yielded slowly to dawn as oil lamps cast a gentle glow through the windows of San Miguel Junction's one-room church. Pine boughs gathered from the nearby hills filled the air with their fresh scent, woven together with late autumn wildflowers along the simple wooden pews. The flowers, purple asters and golden sunflowers, made bright splashes of color against the weathered walls. Inside, the assembled townspeople sat shoulder to shoulder in their Sunday best. Mrs. Hattie Pike had outdone herself with the decorations, weaving late roses through the pine garlands that marked the aisle. Their sweet fragrance mingled with the familiar smells of leather and soap that marked a frontier gathering. Nita stood near the front, her dark eyes bright with pride in her freshly mended dress, a joint labor of love between Christine and the ladies' sewing circle. In her small hands, she clutched a tiny Bible bound in worn leather, its pages marked with a blue ribbon. She shifted from foot to foot, careful not to scuff her polished shoes, watching the door for her soon-to-be parents. Reverend Hale stood before the altar, his Bible open to well-worn pages that spoke of love and faithfulness. The morning light caught the silver in his hair as he smiled at the gathering. When Christine appeared in the doorway, a ripple of appreciative murmurs swept through the congregation. She wore a simple blue dress, her dark hair caught up with white ribbons, and carried a small bouquet of late roses. But it was her smile that transformed her. Confident now, full of joy and purpose. Levi waited at the front, his broad shoulders straight in his best jacket, hat respectfully held in his work-roughened hands. As Christine reached him, Reverend Hale's voice filled the small church with warmth. "Beloved, we gather to witness a covenant of love and mercy. In these times that try men's souls, we see before us proof that God's grace flows like water in dry places." The morning light strengthened as he spoke of family bonds forged stronger than blood, of homes built on faith and welcome. When it came time for the vows, Levi's deep voice trembled with emotion. "I promise you steady hands," he said, holding Christine's fingers in his large ones, "to build with you, protect you, and walk beside you all my days." His eyes flickered to Nita, including her in his pledge, "to keep our door open and our hearth warm." Christine's clear voice carried to the rafters as she responded. "I vow to build with you a home where the lonely find welcome and the wronged find justice." Her fingers tightened on his. "To face whatever comes with faith and courage, and to love the family God has given us." The congregation's amen rolled through the church like a warm wind, full of approval and blessing. Nita beamed as Reverend Hale pronounced them husband and wife, then officially named them as her guardians before God and the community. Behind the church, tables groaned under the weight of pies and coffee pots. Laughter mixed with the clinking of cups as neighbors shared the wedding feast. Mrs. Pike's apple pies disappeared quickly, while ranch wives compared recipes for dried fruit preserves. Children darted between the adults, snatching cookies when they thought no one was looking. The afternoon sun was warm as they began the slow walk home. Mr. Trent, the Pueblo attorney, caught up with them before they left, a leather folder tucked under his arm. "Simple guardianship forms," he explained, handing them to Christine. "Already filed with the territory court. Nita is legally yours now." Marshal Pike paused on his way to the afternoon train, touching the brim of his hat. "Ma'am, Boone." His stern face softened as he looked at Nita. "Young lady, you did right by the law, all of you. Keep that lamp burning." With that, he turned and boarded the waiting train, steam already building for departure. The familiar road home seemed different somehow, more precious, more certain. Nita skipped ahead, then ran back, unable to contain her joy. The afternoon light turned golden as they approached the ranch, painting the simple buildings with glory. At dusk, Levi lifted Nita high in his strong arms so she could hang a lamp in the ranch house window. She positioned it carefully, making sure its light would shine clear across the plains. Inside, Christine moved surely through the kitchen, setting bread to rise for morning, the domestic sounds a comfort in the gathering dark. They came together naturally for evening prayers, 3 voices joining as one. The familiar words took on new meaning, thanksgiving for family found, for justice done, for love that crossed all boundaries. Night settled soft around the ranch house, stars pricking through the darkening sky. The lamp burned steady in the window, its light reaching out across the plains like a beacon, a promise kept. Levi drew Christine close, Nita secure between them. "You don't have to pretend with me," he whispered, the words that had first passed between them now transformed into a deeper vow. This time, they were more than comfort offered to a stranger. They were a promise between family, sealed with love and trust. Thanks for being here. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a feeling, a truth, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another moment that just might speak to your soul.